It's time. Time to get credit for the work you've done. Time to get the recognition you deserve. With Purdue Global, you can move forward in your career, for your family, and for yourself. You're worth the investment in yourself to earn a degree you're proud of, a degree that employers will respect. Purdue's online university is designed to support working adults like you who know it's never too late to accomplish your goals. It's never too late to make a comeback. It's time to start yours today at purdueglobal.edu.
AT&T believes that your phone is part of what makes you, you. So we understand why you're holding it as you eat those cheesy snacks on the go, while you listen to your favorite podcast on the subway, or when you call your best childhood friend from your favorite concert. Nothing should come between you and your connectivity. AT&T 5G is fast, reliable, and secure, and it keeps you connected to family, friends, fun, everything you care about. You'll enjoy fast speeds while you download apps, share your favorite videos, or get your game on. We know you don't let that phone out of sight, much less your grip. But no matter, this is a no-judgment zone. AT&T wants to ensure you can stay connected to what means most to you, so you can prioritize yourself. Requires compatible plan and device. Coverage not available everywhere. Learn more at att.com/5G for you.
This is Holly Fry from Stuff You Missed in History class. Toyota is a leader when it comes to electrified vehicles. Today, battery EVs make up less than 10% of new vehicles sold because of higher cost and concerns about range and charging. Enter Beyond Zero, Toyota's vision for a carbon-neutral future. With an electrified, diversified lineup of hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and battery EVs, Toyota empowers you to choose how to reduce your own carbon footprint. Learn more and get details at toyota.com/beyondzero. Toyota, let's go places.
Before we begin today's episode, I want to let you know that it is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace is the easiest way to create a beautiful website, blog, or any online store idea that you have kicking around in your head. Squarespace features an elegant interface, beautiful templates, and incredible 24/7 customer support. Try Squarespace at squarespace.com and enter the offer code WORDS at checkout to get 10% off. That's WORDS, WORDS, 10% off. Squarespace.com. Build it beautiful. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 100 Words or Less, the podcast. I'm your host, Ray Harkins, and my foot has fallen asleep. Isn't that the worst? The guest this week is Mr. Ben Pobjoy from a record label called Hot Charity Record, and he also manages a band called Single Mothers that is quite spectacular, and the singer at some point will be a guest on this show. And he also contributed to a lot of cool bands back in the day, that for me, that's in like the 90s/early aughts. He played in a band called Spread the Disease, and he also played in a band called the Abandoned Hearts Club, which is where I first met him when I signed his band to Century Media Records. We unfortunately never were able to put anything out, but my friendship was solidified with him during that time, and I was really excited to have Ben on the show. Pleasantries, ideas, and other points of discussion out of the way first, and then we will dive into the interview, and then I'll talk to you a little bit afterwards. In case you haven't noticed, the show has been picking up a lot of steam. We've been getting a lot of cool sponsors to sign on to this, and so I wanted to kind of explain a little bit of how the podcasting ad space works, because I know a lot of people, are maybe curious about it, because I myself, before I started to do podcasting on a more a regular and serious basis, I would just be like, oh yeah, there's an ad, and like that is what it is. So honestly, it's incredibly important for you, the listener, to support sponsors of the podcasts that you like. And when I mean support, like actually try out these products. Like most of the time, a lot of these places are offering you either free or massively discounted products. So do that, because basically what the advertisers do is they look at those actual metrics. And they say, oh, wow, we've had a lot of people from 100 Words or Less, the podcast, support this thing. They signed up to Squarespace, or they bought a mattress from us, or whatever the case may be. They see that, and then they reinvest in the show. And it's amazing because they're investing in independent music. I know that's a kind of a disconnect there, but they're looking at the show, they say, okay, the people that are listening to the show are important to us to speak to. And so therefore we're supporting this show that exists. And it's amazing because honestly, they don't need to do this. And I know this sounds maybe like I'm shilling for the sponsors even more than I probably should be, but I just wanted to kind of close that loop for you as the listener to understand how that world works. You know, sometimes these ads come in through people that I know. Sometimes these ads come in through other avenues. But at the end of the day, it is a vote for independent discussion. And I love that fact. I love the fact that podcasting is reaching new heights that a lot of us never even imagined that have been listening to podcasts for years and years and years. And for those of you that have been listening to it for only a few months, it's even more exciting because you're diving into high quality things that are being put out there as opposed to a lot of the amateur stuff that existed many, many years ago. But anyways, just wanted to kind of close that loop for you, provide a context for why it's important for you to support these sponsors. And in turn, you're supporting the show in ways that I can't even begin to thank you for. Also, if you are an audio person, so say you like to record bands or say you record yourself in GarageBand, please get in touch with me. Because basically, well, first off, I'm not firing the producer for this show. Tom Richfield will always be attached to the show. But basically, I'm launching some new and cool and exciting things in the future. I myself have a very limited scope of talent in regards to editing and producing from a actual functionality standpoint. I was able to edit this show on my own for a while, but then once Tom came in, it added a whole new level of professionalism and just great sound quality. So anyways, I encourage you, if you, the listener, are interested at all in working alongside of me, launching some other cool shows, please email me, 100wordspodcast@gmail.com. There's a lot of exciting things going on. And basically, Tom just simply doesn't have the time to entertain every crazy idea that I have. So I want a few more of you people to reach out and get in touch with me because I think there's some exciting things that we could potentially do together. And if you have experience in recording, it'll be even more exciting. So email me, 100wordspodcast@gmail.com. So Ben, like I said, known him for a long time. He was initially hesitant in doing not only this particular interview, but interviews in general. He's like, you know what, I let the work speak for me, and that's kind of it. So I was like, okay, I respect that. But I was like, I really feel that Ben would enjoy this experience in expressing himself. So I pushed back, showed him some shows of the past that I think he would identify with. And fortunately, he agreed. Because I think Ben is such an incredibly interesting person because basically everything that he has done has been successful in some way, whether it's like his own expression or whether that's the ability to, make some money off something in order to sustain himself to get to the next project. He's just lived the life of an artist, and I always respect that. Even though myself have always participated in creative endeavors, I've honestly had the ability to work within institutions that provided me a living. I was able to work in the creative fields of record labels and everything else without having to, starve to survive. So I always had this quote unquote safety net. And so when I meet and experience people that didn't have that safety net and really, really had to create it on their own, it's just always inspiring. So Ben agreed. He took time out of his vacation he had here in California to drive down to Orange County and meet with me. And it was such a great conversation. So I was really, really thankful for Ben for wanting to do this. So without further ado, here's my discussion with Ben. I will talk to you after the show. And there you go.
Obviously where we first met each other professionally. Sure. And it was one of those things where it was like the Abandoned Hearts Club was, I loved what you guys were doing. And it was definitely one of those things where I was like, wow, I feel lucky that I get to work at a record label and work with a subversive band that you had an agenda. Sure. In this context of here's Century Media Records that's not known for having, they're known for having controversial acts, but controversial in the burning down churches way or whatever. Right. Because there was an agenda attached to it, it felt like obviously there was a larger purpose behind it. Obviously, I presume that was deliberate, but then, how do you kind of reflect on that time and specifically that band where you were obviously, taking your past experiences and trying to make something, I guess, a little bit larger than what just your average band that appears out of nowhere?
Totally. I think like at that time, I'd like kind of grown up in like a traditional hardcore scene and had listened to like a lot of like Youth Crew growing up. And then, hardcore, as you get older, kind of like broadens and you get into like Discord and Hydra Head and whatnot. And so just like the musical palette of, hardcore kind of blossoming kind of inspired me to do something different. And then I've always enjoyed like provoking and art that provokes. And I think like, coming from the hardcore scene, especially like up in Canada and Toronto, it's all white people, like it's all dudes. It's like incredibly like homoerotic in weird ways. And I think just toying with that has always been like quite interested, right? Like I think, when you look at like hardcore, it's like predominantly middle class. And it's like, especially coming out of the hardcore scene in the mid 90s where it's like white people trying to talk about global issues or class issues or race issues. And to me, that it's the same kind of issue I had with university where there's so much absurdity of, white people preaching to white people about issues that are like greater than their experience or knowledge.
Right.
So I think just provoking that and, just the absurdity always kind of interested me. Like, I think I always had personal politics that maybe played into it a bit, but I've always enjoyed bands that like entertain, like, rather than kind of like the mid 90s when everyone kind of complained, like it was an intellectually interesting time, but also kind of boring at sometimes. And you just wanted to see great music. So kind of that fine line of creating something provocative, but also something like entertaining and not doing it from like a moral standpoint, of having kind of like a very hard agenda.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's very interesting because I can see where, I do agree when it's like, when you do have the, Steeped in the mid 90s was one of those things where it's like every show you went to, you knew you were going to have a distro, you knew you were going to have a table full of zines, you knew you were going to have a person really mad about whatever particular issue like that happened last week. But then that sometimes sucked the fun or the release of just like, oh, I'm experiencing a show and music and that sort of stuff.
And I always love like the personalities. I mean, like you can have extremes, like Dwid from Integrity and One Life Crew is kind of this, I don't want to say like right wing or extremist, but just kind of like tough and like kind of like provocative and kind of like a really aggressive macho sense. But then you also have like other personalities, like on a other spectrum, like Jesse Pearson or Ian McKay. And I always just thought these people were like just captivating, you know, and never wanted to mirror myself after them, but just enjoyed bands that had personality versus, bands that you couldn't discern from the pack.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really important point because I definitely think, even just the band's name, like the Abandoned Hearts Club, was so in and of itself provocative, and like I said, it did invoke these feelings of like this is larger, like especially with the word of club, like this is larger than just like these 5 or 6 individuals creating this music. But then obviously it's like, if people were to see you live, it was definitely like, oh yeah, like, yeah, we're a club, but like you got to gain entry in some capacity. Like in like you said, in that sort of like pushback on the audience.
Yeah, totally. Well, I've always liked, whether it was like the Makeup or Nation of Ulysses, like these bands where I think growing up with creative parents and being in museums and just understanding kind of like iconography and the way things looked, I always loved bands where you could kind of tie to like a place or time and thing. And so when I would see old photos of the Germs or old photos of like the Makeup, and you would be like, oh, if I put that photo in a bunch of photos with 10 other bands, you could always tell who that band was. So I liked having like a clear aesthetic in terms of, everything from like packaging to the way we dressed on stage to, just be something that you could understand essentially and would stick out.
Yeah, no, for sure. I this is such a vivid memory for me, but it's just like, speaking to like the iconography and just the way that bands present themselves, or it's like a band like Elliott. I remember when they were touring off of their first LP, US Songs, they played like Coos Cafe here in Orange County. And it was one of those things where I was only aware of them by name. They were setting up their equipment because Coos Cafe was obviously just like this hole in the wall venue. So they were dressed up in like, like white shirts, ties, and like slacks. And it looked like obviously they could just like work at a bank. But then it was like after that tour, the singer Chris Higdon did an interview where it was like, oh, we deliberately dressed like that because people assume that if we're wearing, an Earth Crisis t-shirt or whatever, like we're going to be a hardcore band. So like they wanted this blank canvas. And I just always like, that makes so much sense, especially in those days where it's like, obviously you couldn't access information on the internet as easily as you do then, or as easily as you do now. But I just always thought it was so evocative where it's just like, oh yeah, I don't know what this band sounds like. And then you watch them play and you're like, oh wow, like it's a fresher take, And like you said, like what you were trying to accomplish was just like the uniformity what you were trying to kind of push forward.
And like, it's one thing I always think that like punk tries to be its own thing, like sometimes to its detriment. I think it's kind of a little extreme now, but like I'd always loved rock and roll, right? Like I just love, like New York Dolls, like they look wild. You saw that and you're like, wow, this is going to be crazy. And I remember like really in the early 90s, I went to Buffalo and I saw Dead Guy and they were all dressed up like in police outfits, like classic police outfits. And they played, and I remember one guy had like a clear SG and I was like, this is so fucking weird. Right. And so like didn't pertain to the music, but then they're angry and it's called Dead Guy. And so I just love that showmanship. Like I think it makes it really fun. And I've always just kind of loved that.
Gravitated towards that. Yeah. You were born and raised in a suburb outside of Toronto, right? It was one of those things where, I mean, in obviously like reading that bio you sent me, and like easily one of the most detailed like thing. And
I don't do interviews, so I was like, I don't know what information you're going to be going on.
And I appreciated that just because it was so, it was very, you've always struck me as a person who's obviously very organized and very deliberate. Was that always like a thread that kind of, sort of came into your life, or was that something you like learned?
I think it was like kind of learned. Like I grew up with parents who were like from England. They immigrated to Canada and started their businesses. And so always having like entrepreneurial parents who had started their own businesses, like you kind of just grow up in like an environment that's kind of like diligent. Like it wasn't clinical, but there was no safety net for them insofar as, like they had to work to pay the bills. So culturally, that was kind of ingrained in me early on. And then, when I was kind of grade 8, grade 9, getting into punk, because there was kind of a blooming scene just outside Toronto at the time. And I just started booking shows and making zines, like all these like, fairly primitive things, but there was obviously 20 steps involved. And that kind of just got me on the path of, essentially just like making culture and just realizing that there's, any hard thing is just 100 simple steps, right? Is what, like, nothing's impossible. Like, yeah. If
you break it down, like this thing that seems insurmountable. I mean, I remember a piece of advice that my father gave me before he passed away, where it was like, I can't remember what it was I was talking to him about, but it was like this massive undertaking. And he was like, just do a little bit of it a day. And I was like, oh, you're right. I don't need to do this all in like one day or 1 week or whatever. But yeah, breaking it down. Yeah. Like, and then you do get that, that connotation for how something is achieved.
Yeah. So yeah, I think like being organized like came natural is also something that is learned. But I say like as I get older, I get less organized. I try and just focus on like coming up with ideas now, because the work I do now is like a lot bigger that I'd get dwarfed by the details.
Right. That would bog you too much. Do you have siblings or brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I have one younger brother who's 4 years younger.
Okay.
So I'm turning 34 next month and he'll be turning 30 this year.
Okay. I guess your sort of focus and like how much you delved into like music in general. It seems like I see a lot of people that kind of gravitate towards it that are only children, and I'm reflecting on my own experience because I have no brothers or sisters. So like you struck me as like a person that didn't have like, did your brother get into any of this sort of stuff?
Yeah, I think like after the fact, like he definitely got into punk and hardcore, during his teens and early 20s, and then kind of got into university. And I think that kind of consumed him and became like an intellectual. And I think he's just graduating law school now. So he's been like in post-secondary school for like over 15 years.
Right.
Where for me, I think I became a lot more passionate about it. But I just happened to go to high school at a time, like in the mid 90s, snowboarding culture was huge and skateboarding culture was huge. And, like Green Day Dookie was like a mainstream kind of radio song record. So hardcore was really vibrant, and because the word was just out in my high school, I was able to kind of get into that. So you didn't
necessarily have obviously just because you were the oldest in your family, you didn't have I guess a gatekeeper, so to speak. Like
there wasn't a gatekeeper. Like I went to high school and you're like, oh, they're punks. You know what I mean? Like those are weirdos. And then somehow, through kind of being involved in like skateboarding, just, someone's like gives you a hand flyer for a $2 show and you're like, oh, this is good. And, I kind of just walked into like a really vibrant scene where you had bands like New Day Rising and Grade and, Chokehold. And it was just like a really rich time. Like everyone likes to say that their generation kind of had the golden age, but I think it was like the last big DIY golden age before, punk and hardcore kind of had a resurgence where it blew up and, bands could be career bands. So I just kind of stumbled into it at a really great time. And, I would love to be like, yeah, I just seek it out and ride a bus really far, but I pretty much had to walk 15 minutes from my house to see like really incredible shows. And
right, it was like it was dropped in your lap, but at the same time, you obviously had to. You felt I'm obviously in what you, like you said, the sort of culture you were creating around that. You felt that. Was that because of like a compulsion to create, or a compulsion to, I guess, contribute to the scene that you were starting to?
Yeah, I think like, you know, like it was a really vibrant time where like punk and activism were tied hand in hand. So there was people organizing like anti-fur marches and like food not bombs. And so doing was a big part of the culture. And growing up, parents who were like new to Canada, they didn't have a lot of Canadian friends. So just doing and creating was like quite natural to their experience. So when I joined this, I was like, what I think like really got me hook, line, and sinker into punk was this fact that what punk taught me is that like you don't need permission to do anything. You just have to try, right? And I think like a lot of people in like mainstream society, it's like you have to go to school. Like school is A, and then that leads to you being able to do B. You need to be licensed. You need to do this. Or like punk is like all these like wackos, just, you know, like that's why there's bad promoters. Like that's why there's zines where the pagination's wrong. Cause it's like, and that's what I love about it, is that there's no permission. Therefore you can do as much or as little in the scene as possible. And so that just spoke to me when I was like, wait, I can like write a band and like tell them I want to do a show and can't guarantee them any money and they're going to want to do it. I was like, this is amazing.
Right.
Like, you know, my biggest exposure is like being on the hook for like the $50 I have to throw to like the church hall rental to do a show. So for me, and I just thought it was like incredibly amazing just to be able to, you know, I've always been inspired by people who make things out of nothing. And the fact that like it basically, there weren't many inputs that it took to like put on a show. Like you had to maybe make some calls because this is pre-internet,
right? And
get to like a Kinko's and make some photocopies and just skate around and hand out flyers and just hope people showed up. And they did, because it's the suburbs. So it's not like you're competing for things.
This is what's happening on Saturday night.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah,
I am jealous of your experience in regards to the like the Southern Ontario, Toronto, whatever you'd like to call the hardcore scene. Because I think it was around like I was around like 17 or 18 when I first started to like kind of like trip on that, where it was like, you know, through Left 4 Dead, Grade, Acrid, all that stuff. And it was one of those things, it just blew my mind, because it was like, here's this area like 3,000 miles from me. And it seemed so fertile, where like you said, there was a lot of shows happening, but like all the bands were so drastically different, to whereas I was looking at my reflective experience here in Orange County, and yeah, you could point to bands that were sonically different, but it was like, generally speaking, it was kind of, you know, a lot of the same-ish sort of stuff. And so I was always like, oh my gosh, like a band like Acrid can play with a band like, you know, like you said, like Great or whatever, and like obviously they shared members and stuff like that. But it seemed it seemed pretty open. Like, was that reflective of your experience there?
100%. I think like what was like phenomenal is going to shows where it'd be like a grindcore show supported by like a backpack emo band where kids sat on the floor. And I think like one thing that like we were quite lucky about is, you know, I kind of got into going to the shows. Like Neil Rodman, the singer of Acrid, was probably 16 at the time, where I was like 13 or 14, and I could grab a ride with him to Hamilton. And just geographically, you know, we were probably just a little over an hour from like Buffalo. So you had like Slugfest, and later like bands like Hourglass. And then, you know, a couple more hours away was like Erie, Pennsylvania, and Wilkes-Barre. You know, like Hellfest in Syracuse was on our radar. So there was just like all these pockets of different scenes that were 2 hours apart. They were all quite different. And I think, you know, within the context of being outside the internet, we had kind of like a little globalized music scene in that way, right? Where like Toronto was slightly different than Hamilton. Hamilton was different than Buffalo. Buffalo was different than Erie, but they all kind of fed into each other. And so because of that, I remember like friends would go away for the weekend. They'd come back with like 5-7 inches and like, you got to check this out. And also like Detroit wasn't far, and there was an amazing scene there with like Ottawa and Nama and bands like that. So that mix was just out there. So I think it just enabled like Ontario, which was Southern Ontario, was kind of at this crossroads in between all these places. So all these different sounds fed into it. So there's so many different inspirations to pull from. So I just think that's, you know, different than those scenes where, you know, DC had a sound, or New York City hardcore had a sound, where it was just a tapestry of so many different inputs that allowed it to have such a broad spectrum of sounds.
It's the only thing I guess I kind of lean on from a nostalgia factor, because like obviously like you, I definitely reject a lot of notions of just like you said, like, oh, this was the golden age and everything else sucks, like that's new. But I miss the feeling of being able to pinpoint a band to a particular area, where it's just like, you know, whatever, like bands like, you know, the National Acrobat and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that from Louisville, you'd be like, oh yeah, like weirdish angular hardcore.
Yeah.
That kind of comes from Louisville, you know?
Absolutely.
And I do miss those pockets because obviously either bands, once they become successful enough, they fracture, they live in different places. And
Yeah.
so like, I definitely miss those elements of like, oh yeah, I wish you could kind of pinpoint that particular band to a particular like
totally.
town or scene or whatever.
Totally.
So like you mentioned, like your parents were obviously creative and entrepreneurial. So once you started to kind of delve into this world of creation and art from like an independent perspective, you know, I mean, it sounds like they obviously gave you a lot of freedom from that perspective. But was there, I'm sure that there was some sort of conflict in the usual, I guess, teenage angst period, or was it pretty much like
It was pretty cool. Like, I think my parents' rule was like, as long as you do well in school, you can do whatever you want. Like, I couldn't pull all-nighters, but they're like, if you're home by a reasonable hour and you're doing well at school and you're not like, you know, crashing the car or getting wasted or any of that, you can do whatever you want. And I was quite lucky because my dad in England, when he was in his teens, started to hitchhike. And so when I asked to go on roadie my first tour at like 14 across the States, he was like, can't say no to you because
I've already shared this story with you.
yeah, he's like, I've already shared this story, and my dad let me. And my dad had like hitchhiked like out of England, like into France, right? So he was just like, oh, okay, man, he's
Right.
like, I feel like I'm in the position of my dad. So he was always quite cool. I think my dad was always like quite interesting because he more tested me on like ideology and questioned, you know, some of like the philosophy. So getting into like veganism, environmentalism and whatnot. I think he'd always been just someone who would like questioned authority and disliked authority, despite the fact that he came out of the military, which is something I don't understand.
Right.
So there was kind of like ideological confrontation, but I think he just did it to kind of test me on what I stood for. So, but beyond that, yeah, they weren't really like too worried, you know, as long as I did well in school, that was kind of like, I had the golden ticket to keep going.
Yeah.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Let me tell you, the holidays are awesome. They've got some great moments, whether it's spending time with friends and family, gift giving, all of the things. I personally love Christmas lights. Like, I can't wait to put them up. It just makes me feel warm inside. But there are moments where it's like, man, it's overwhelming, or I'm feeling really alone or sad. All of the things that just, you know, can kind of compound it during the holidays. That is why you need to take a beat and maybe take that moment for yourself. Give the gift of time to yourself. And that's honestly why I love dipping into therapy. That's why I also love working with BetterHelp, because they make finding a therapist online so dang easy. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. Like I said, it's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire, and then you get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for any reason at no additional charge. Please, in this season of giving, give to yourself as well with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Ray to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Ray for 10% off your first month. Take care of yourself, please.
This episode is brought to you by Toyota. We all agree that reducing carbon emissions is a good thing, and once again, Toyota is leading the way. We hear a lot about fully electric vehicles, and Toyota has them, with more on the way. But we also know a BEV is not for everyone, whether it's because of cost, range, or concerns about finding a charging station when you need it. Plus, the raw materials used to manufacture batteries are limited. Enter Beyond Zero, Toyota's vision for a carbon-neutral future, in vehicles and in manufacturing plants too in the years ahead. The materials used to make just one long-range battery for an EV could be used to make batteries for 6 plug-in hybrids or 90 gas-electric hybrids. That's why Toyota's position today is electrified, diversified, empowering you to choose how to reduce your own carbon footprint with the vehicle that's right for you. A hybrid, plug-in hybrid, or battery EV. So shop, learn more, and get details at toyota.com/beyond0. Toyota, let's go places.
It's never too late. Never too late to earn a degree. Never too late for a comeback. Between your busy career and taking care of a family, it can feel like there's never a good time to go back to school. But your time is now. Time to start your comeback with Purdue Global. As Purdue's online university for working adults, Purdue Global is dedicated to supporting adults like you who know it's time to earn the recognition you deserve. You have the experience, you have the knowledge, it's time to get credit for the work you've done. You can balance work, family, and everything in between while earning your degree. It's time to move forward in your career, for your family and for yourself, with a degree you're proud of, a degree that employers will recognize and respect. You're worth this investment in yourself to earn a degree you deserve. It's never too late. Never too late to go back to school and come back stronger with an education you can trust. Now is the time for your comeback. Start yours today at purdueglobal.edu.
Yeah, and that's such a liberating feeling, because your experience is definitely indicative of mine as well, where it was like my mom was like, all right, on weeknights you got to be home by 10 or whatever, and like she gave you were given ground rules, and as long as you like didn't break that trust, because like to me it's just my friend that acted inappropriately or did these things where it was just like, all that's going to do is just like bum your parents out, and then you're not going to be able to do the fun stuff that you can potentially do under the radar, where it's like, I remember being like, I'm going to go to a show and I'll be able to get home right at like 9:59, and then I won't get in trouble, and my parents aren't the wiser because they didn't know that I went to a show or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely wasn't transparent. Like, there were some nights where I'm like, I'm gonna be home late, I'm going to a show, and that would be like a 2-hour drive to Buffalo, you know what I mean, and then like stay out to like Mighty Taco eating and get back at like 4 a.m. and my parents were like, you were out late, what time did you get back? And I'm like, oh, 1, I just went to a show in Toronto. And then also the first time I asked to go on tour with a band, like, I think, my parents knew what punk rock was, but I don't think they understood like the culture. So when I said like we're going on tour, I think they knew that we had vans, but I don't think they knew it was like as shitty as it was, like sleeping in gutters. Like, I think they were like, oh, the band probably gets enough money to stay at a hotel. Right. Which when I look back at the time, it's like, we toured with like maps. Like, maybe there was like MapQuest.
Right.
None of us had cell phones. Like, I would go on the road for
you're out in the wilderness. Right?
I'd go on the road for like 3 weeks, like roading with like $200, like not even enough to get back. And just like, I think like my parents had like thought it was a lot more pro than it was.
Right. Yeah.
They're like, oh, there probably is a tour manager and they have hotels, versus like, the wheels flying off the van, and
totally, this is all held together by duct tape.
Yeah. At best.
Once you started to, dive more into that culture, and like you said, kind of booking shows, and what did you like? Did you have the experience of being like, once you toured with New Day Rising? Because like did you ever actually play New Day Rising?
No, I never played in them. They like, for whatever reason, like brought me on tour to roadie, and I had no clue what roadieing meant. Right. I don't even know what I did. Like, I pretty much sat at the merch table. Like, I think they just liked having me around. Like, I turned 14 on that tour, I remember, in Kentucky, and I'm like, I don't even know how I can get across the border.
I was going to say,
because I don't think I even had. You needed a passport to cross back then. And I remember once I like lost my birth certificate, and I just borrowed my friends to go to the US, and I got his mom to handwrite me a note. She was like, this kid, Chris, can like cross the border. Like, that's how like it feels like 1,000 years ago.
Totally. Where it's like that flew. Like, now you would be shot on sight. Like,
they would never let you in. They would just be like a handwritten note with. So it was super weird. And then like, so that was the first band I kind of went away. Went on the road with.
Right. And were you? I presume just because of the age and the interesting experiences you were having, did you immediately have the notion to be like, I would like to play in a band? Like, that would be fun?
No, no musical inclination, no musical inclination whatsoever. I think like being in a band was the outcome of people just being like, we like you, you can't do anything. Screaming probably isn't that hard. You be the singer. Like, there was no like aptitude test or like musicality, like none whatsoever.
And you showed no signs of like wanting to like learn guitar or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think in hindsight, like, the only thing I wish my parents had done differently my whole life is put me in music class and force me to learn like how to play piano. Because I think when you can like read sheet music and play piano, it's just like a jump off point to every other instrument. My parents were both kind of into visual art. My mom painted as a hobby. My dad did like pottery and photography. So they were kind of visual. They loved music. Like, my dad had a huge record collection that he brought from Europe, but they had never played in bands. Like, they went out dancing in, the UK. That was their extent. So I just didn't really have like that older brother who played guitar or a cousin who played guitar. Like, like my family, we all kind of lived on the same block, and the kids played soccer because our parents played soccer and rugby. So it just wasn't there, but music was always there in my house. So I never aspired to be a musician, but I loved music, and, you know, I loved being involved in the scene. And then, you know, the people that did know how to play music were like, you should just do this. All right. No
Well,
permission needed.
Hey, Ben's a good hang. So like, maybe he should just like scream.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it is interesting just because you do, when you do have that experience when you're younger and touring and stuff like that, and see kind of a band playing, you do have that feeling of like, oh, like that would be cool to do that in some capacity. But you were just happy to, I guess, exist around it and kind of like,
yeah. I always thought like there are some really great frontmen like around, like, you know, like I would see Scott Vogel and I was like, wow, this guy's a beast, man. Like he's like, you know, Scott's like not a big guy, but he's like has a physical presence, you know, like, and he's like pretty like fearless and diving in the crowd. And I was like, I'm not that big. I don't want to get like beat up. And then, you know, you would have like more musical bands like Grade where like the singer could actually sing. And I'm like, I can't sing. So you're
like, where do I land in this?
You know, or I'd see Converge really early and I'm like, wow, this is just like the athleticism of this band is like incredible. So there was all these things of just like never saw myself doing that. But then I guess when given the opportunity, it was like, well, like that's the thing I love about punk, where it's like, you know, like I wasn't a singer. If I sucked at a singer, I still wouldn't be a singer. So therefore, like there's no strikeout to failing. I'm still in the same position. Whereas if it goes well, then I can be in a band and I can tour. So that's amazing. So might as well try, right?
Right. What kind of kid did you find yourself being like in high school? And you know, because you seem like you've always struck me as a very social person, but not to the extent where you would be like, I guess, the sort of loudmouth, you know, like. Yeah,
I definitely wasn't a loudmouth. Like when I got into high school, like the music scene was greater than like one high school. So I had a lot of my good friends didn't go to my high school and they didn't really live that close, you know, maybe like 10 to 20 miles away where you'd have to get on the bus or jump in a car. So I had a few friends that were into punk and hardcore at school, but I was also put in like the enhanced program with like total nerds.
Sure.
But they were really like fucking dope. Like they were super cool and super smart. So I was like, I love these nerds. Like, you know, I'm not saying like nerds are my people because I was into music, but I always kind of existed across these different worlds. And then like, for whatever reason, my older cousin went to my high school and he was like joined the cross country team. So I knew some jocks. So I just kind of like was friends with a lot of different people at school, but not like as tight with them as I was like the people from the music scene. So, you know,
you were able to filter through different people.
Yeah. I think I was just kind of like that guy who was into music, but didn't have like a clique at school. You know? And like the other thing too, is like, I had like people that I was friendly with at school, but like, since I was 14, I was like touring, going across the States. And so when you're like hanging out with some kid and he works at like Dairy Queen for the summer, it's like, dude, that's like, it's so boring, right? Like objectively. So, you know, like for them, they would be like worried about trying to do well in exams at the end of the school year. And I'd be trying to like lock down shows for that tour. So it was just like, just different existence, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's definitely a weird experience when you do come back from school for whatever your junior, senior year of high school. And like you have like, either you're doing your own tours with your own bands and like, just comparing notes with friends being like, oh yeah, I didn't see you this summer. Well, yeah, because I was gone for 3 months. Like I played, you know, twice. And
I remember in high school, people would be like, it seems like your band's so big, but I've never heard of it. Like you tour all over. Are you going to be on the radio? And I was like, I don't think so.
You on the radio?
And they're like, how can you tour if you don't have like music videos? And I was like, oh, can't even explain. Like, it was like it's niche to a real niche support system of little scenes across the US.
Right. Like, hey, you know your living room? Yeah, I play in a lot of those. Like,
yeah. And they're like, can I hear your band you play? And they're like, this is terrible.
Right. I can't even wrap my head around that.
Yeah.
When did Spread the Disease kind of start to come into your life? Was that like post high school? And like,
yeah, I think Spread the Disease was like an outgrowth of this band called Carenza, which is like super political, like hilariously political, like embarrassingly political now. And so they were a band that was fully operational. And then at some point they were like, let's get a second singer. And I was like, sure. At that time where bands had 2 singers, to me now is still like so terrible. And then I don't quite remember what happened, but the first singer, so goddamn confusing. The first singer at some point was like, I don't want to do vocals. I want to play bass. So there's a shuffle up. So then the band kind of like, everyone like playing together. And one band ended and a new band started, which was Spread the Disease, probably around, it was probably like 15, 16, grade 10.
Okay.
And then that continued kind of like onwards.
Sure. And you sang on both records, correct?
Yeah, I sang on both mediocre records on Eulogy.
Oh, dude, I just remember it was one of those things where labels that I like kept total beats on.
Yeah.
And, like Eulogy was one of them where I was just like, dude, whatever they put out, like I'm all on board for. And it was like, even terrible bands to this day where it's like that band Forever and a Day, like stuff that they put out that I was like, dude, I'm so on board with this. But I remember Spread the Disease coming out and it was just like, dude, black metal influenced hardcore? Like,
bad idea. Bad idea.
But I just remember being so enthusiastic about it because it was, again, it was obviously from the area that I was already paying attention to. I was like, whoa, these two great worlds, like Southern Ontario and then like Eulogy coming together. Was it one of those things that you like people did kind of pay attention to you guys because of obviously like the Eulogy connection or just like the pedigree of the people that were playing with?
I would say there was little to no pedigree.
Sure.
I think like Dave Bushmeyer from New Day Rising was in the band and he was older and, he'd probably been going to shows for about like 10 years before then. So he was quite like established in the scene and is like a personality like in his own right that has like rubbed people the wrong way. I love him. He's always had like the best intentions, but I think like he's driven some people crazy. So he had, a lot of friends in the scene. And then Trevor from the band was also booking. He got this like incredible gig at a YMCA in Oakville where he was like paid to do like youth programming, which means he was like just paid to put on shows. So because of that, he was putting on shows like regularly, like, 1 to 2 shows a week. And so therefore was booking every local band. So, and he was really cool about just, throwing tons of different bands on the bill. So I think like a lot of people just liked him. So, just having those two guys definitely gave us like legs up in terms of people kind of caring versus just kind of entering a scene where, it's not like we played show one and there was like fans, but at least people were coming out, which is always great as opposed to, playing to no one.
Right. People were aware like, oh, this is a thing from these people who.
Yeah. Like they'd be like, this is Dave and Trevor's new band. We should check it out.
Right.
Like people knew me, but I was like quite young and I didn't have like, like growing up before the internet, like you look at like show flyers now and be like X members of like 7 different bands for, they kind of be like, oh, I liked one of those bands. I should care about this.
Right. That ushered you through like pretty much until like you started to go to university, correct?
Yeah. So I think like played in Spread the Disease all throughout high school. And then I can't remember the reason why it tapered off. I actually think it was like some of the members like geographically going to university quite far, like Trevor, who was in the band, who was quite an organizer in the band and, he promoted as well. So he was kind of like the organizational backbone. So when he left, I think things kind of like splintered. And then going into university, I just had some of us were now like living in the city, living in Toronto, going to school. And then there was just that desire to start a band, I think, as like our taste got a bit more sophisticated, listening to stuff like beyond, just like the hardcore music we've grown up with.
Right. And so you weren't, even though you were the default businessman of the Abandoned Hearts Club, you didn't have much sort of, I guess, business interplay within the context of Spread the Disease?
No, Spread the Disease last, like Trevor was like older than me and I kind of didn't want to. I always think that like the best bands have like, one chief and like Indians and, when there's like 2 chiefs like knocking heads, like it can just be kind of like disastrous. Trevor had like a big personality and it never like conflicted. Like he was like quite like hard-headed in a good way. And, I always kind of agreed with what he was doing. And so, and I was a bit younger. So by the time I got a bit older and the Abandoned Hearts Club, like was my band.
Right.
I don't mean that in like a ruler sense, but I felt like, I was a guy that registered the van and, like registered the website. And so when I was older, I just kind of felt that, I could take those responsibilities on myself and,
Right. Yeah. And be able to put it together because you had, for lack of a better term, like the vision of what it
and it kind of learned like in Trevor's shadow, like he was one of those guys where he was like older than me and I could ask him for advice. And so, kind of by the time I was in my late teens going to university, I pretty much knew what you needed to do to get a band functional.
Sure. You mentioned earlier, as you started to go to university, like you felt it kind of I guess, unstimulating or uninteresting, and you kind of were pulled away from that. What was, I guess, before you were pulled away from that, what was kind of the path you were setting yourself on? Like, do you want to be a teacher? Like, where did you want to land?
I felt like quite a lot of pressure to go to university right out of the gates. Like, both my parents had been like pretty working class in England. My dad had gone to university, but then left to join the military. And so there was always this kind of, not a narrative of like, we moved here to give you a better life, but essentially like my parents just being like, there's a lot of opportunity for you here. So I didn't want to squander it. So just, I think, as an outgrowth of being involved in the hardcore scene, I always loved history and politics. So I went to study that. I think with having a bit of an eye to go into law, but when I got to university, I found it quite disappointing. Like, my little brother had a great experience and I was always so jealous, but having read, like Howard Zinn and Chomsky since the time I was 14, and then going into a first year political science course where they're discussing like the differences between capitalism and communism, like it felt, and it's not like I was more intelligent than those people. I don't want it to come across that way, but I'd already been familiar with these ideas for 5 years and had read quite in depth about it, that I just knew it was going to be a bumpy, kind of boring road.
Right. So you're like, I got to slog this out for 2 years and then an additional.
And I was like touring with bands and I was like really trying to make a run with it during university. So I'd say for the first 2 years, I wasn't giving it like my best at university. And then kind of during university is when like the sea change with piracy happened. Like, there was already like pennies in the pot if you're a punk band. And then with piracy, I was like, oh my God, this is even tougher. So
this episode is brought to you by Toyota. We all agree that reducing carbon emissions is a good thing, and once again, Toyota is leading the way. We hear a lot about fully electric vehicles, and Toyota has them, with more on the way. But we also know a BEV is not for everyone, whether it's because of cost, range, or concerns about finding a charging station when you need it. Plus, the raw materials used to manufacture batteries are limited. Enter Beyond Zero, Toyota's vision for a carbon-neutral future, in vehicles and in manufacturing plants too in the years ahead. The materials used to make just one long-range battery for an EV could be used to make batteries for 6 plug-in hybrids or 90 gas-electric hybrids. That's why Toyota's position today is electrified, diversified, empowering you to choose how to reduce your own carbon footprint with the vehicle that's right for you. A hybrid, plug-in hybrid, or battery EV. So shop, learn more, and get details at toyota.com/beyond zero. Toyota, let's go places.
It's never too late. Never too late to earn a degree. Never too late for a comeback. Between your busy career and taking care of a family, it can feel like there's never a good time to go back to school. But your time is now. Time to start your comeback with Purdue Global. As Purdue's online university for working adults, Purdue Global is dedicated to supporting adults like you who know it's time to earn the recognition you deserve. You have the experience, you have the knowledge, it's time to get credit for the work you've done. You can balance work, family, and everything in between while earning your degree. It's time to move forward in your career, for your family and for yourself, with a degree you're proud of, a degree that employers will recognize and respect. You're worth this investment in yourself to earn a degree you deserve. It's never too late. Never too late to go back to school and come back stronger with an education you can trust. Now is the time for your comeback. Start yours today at purdueglobal.edu.
Okay, round 2. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right. ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Excuse me, pardon me. I must interrupt this great conversation we're having with Kevin for today's sponsor. It's Casper Mattress. Now, I know what you're thinking. Mattresses, really? But this is the real deal. It's obsessively engineered and American-made at a very, very fair price. And now you, the listener, can get $50 towards any mattress purchase by going to casper.com/words and using the code WORDS, WORDS. Now listen, we spent a third of our lives asleep. Don't you want to make that a good experience? Casper brings together two extremely comfortable technologies for better night's sleep. Latex foam and memory foam. You know what those two things are. You've laid on those, whether it's a pillow or a mattress, but Casper has just the right amount of sink and just the right amount of bounce, no matter what you're desiring from a mattress. And they've got a risk-free trial and return policy. They will deliver it right to your house, and you can try it for 100 days. And if you don't like it, they'll pick it back up. That's amazing, because how painful is the process of shopping for a mattress? You go into a store, you lay on it for like 30 seconds, and you're like, I guess this is good. And then a truck comes out, and they barely are able to fit it in your house, and it's just a nightmare. This is so much easier. You will actually get to sleep on this. So it's $500 for a twin-size mattress and $950 for a king-size mattress. Compare that to any other industry average, and it is an absolutely amazing value. So like I said, $50 towards any mattress purchase by going to casper.com/words and using the code WORDS, WORDS. I've slept on these things. They're incredible. Just do it, okay? Because realistically, it helps the show and it also helps you sleep and wake up and feeling awesome. So like I said, $50 towards any mattress, casper.com/words, using the code WORDS. Terms and conditions apply, of course, all that legal jargon, but do it. Try Casper. You won't regret it.
I had this hopes of going to law school, but then just realizing that, within the academic, like being intellectual is different than being academic. And I just wasn't part of that academic system. And kind of during that time, I was like, well, I can take my skill set as a promoter and create like a design agency where I would work in music, but more on like the packaging end. So,
right. And that was Born Switzerland.
Yeah, that was Born Switzerland.
The thing that I always admired about you from that perspective as well, where it was like, it seemed, I always really like people like the notion of like, faking it till you make it.
Yeah.
Where it's like having the idea, especially it's like when you exist in the real world, where it's like, you booking a show is going to be meaningless to somebody on the outside. But you had this idea of like looking very official, legitimate, like, whatever, whether it's like from just the way your website looks or whether the way you present yourself, all these notions I feel like you really paid attention to. And like the all the design work that you were doing out of that, it seemed to me, it struck me very professional, deliberately so, where it's just like, oh yeah, like we come from this background, but like, I want to make sure that like people that don't understand this world will still want to work with us. Like, was that kind of the intention?
Totally. Like I'm still waiting to this day. I'm almost like in my mind looking over my shoulder, like getting ready to be busted. Like I don't feel like a fraud, but I've just like ended up in these rooms where I'm like, how am I here?
Yeah.
And I'm just waiting for someone to ask about a degree or ask about a CV, and they never do. And, luckily, like I have like somewhat of a gift of gab and come up with good enough ideas that always see me through the next round. But, what I learned really early on was that like perception is reality. It just is. Like if something looks good, people tend to think it is good. And when behind the scenes, it sucks. And I think like a lot of my bands are proof positive of that. Like, it looked great. And now when I revisit the actual like product or output, I'm like, this sucks. But, it looked good. So that did a lot of like the heavy lifting.
Totally. Like that got us like 75% of the way there. It's like, the other 25%, it was a little bumpy, but yeah. I remember too, like such a very, a funny experience that I had with you was obviously when we were getting together the full length that you guys were trying to accomplish, the Aloha Cocksuckers full length.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things I'll never forget cause I mean, you and I are the same age.
Yeah.
And so having the experience of you basically laying out like, hey, so we want to call our record Aloha Cocksuckers, and me being like, wow, how am I going to present this to my boss that will be that could at least get him on board in some capacity.
Yeah.
But I just remember being so I wouldn't even, because there was no like real conflict between you and I. It was just a matter of like,
this is making my job really hard.
Totally. But I just remember being like, oh wow, all right, I got to wrap my head around this and then figure out how to sell this to the uppers or whatever. But it was it definitely was an experience that I'm sure that obviously you were reflecting on that and reflecting on why you were attempting to do that was very I guess liberating in some respects, or it's just like, again, kind of trying to provoke people and being that sort of, like, oh yeah, we want to call our record Aloha Cocksuckers and you're going to like that, like to the outside world, not to me particularly. Was there, I guess it was kind of trying to assemble that and rally the troops. Was it one of those things? Because it struck me as a difficult thing for you to obviously keep everybody inspired in the band.
I don't know. Yeah, it was kind of like there's a lot of different personalities like in the band. Like some guys were older, some guys were younger, some guys were in school, like some guys were doing like a ton of drugs. So
Right.
I think that is what made it fun. But what also was like, it's like the death punch was that like, you know, I think when things are dangerous, they can be exciting, but when they're dangerous, they can also be impossible to work with. So we had like a drummer who was really great. And when we were trying to get serious, he just is like, I'm going back to school. And we're like, really? We have a great opportunity to do this. And he's like, yeah, I really want to go back to school. And so we then tried out like other drummers and it wasn't working. And I'm just not one to, you know, you can't kind of go into a new iteration of the band if it's not as good as the previous iteration. So I just kind of saw that and I was like, let's just kill this as opposed to watch it die a really slow, painful death.
Right.
You know,
we can wait these next 2 years and it will be really, really painful.
Yeah, we can just do it instead of me just being like, I told you so, and having to collectively experience that on stage when the band's even worse, you know?
Right. That started to dissolve and you were doing design work and you, in your, I guess, kind of collective body of work, like you've been, you know, if someone were to obviously look at everything, like you've worked in almost every single medium from photography to like actual, you know, zines and printing and magazines from that perspective. Is it one of those things where you do those out of sheer interest in that medium, or is it just the opportunity presents itself and you're like, well, I'll figure this out. I just want to do it.
Yeah, I think a bit of both. Like, I think who you are and how you present yourself to the work, like present yourself to the world in turn, like provides you with opportunities. I don't mean that in like a new age way, but if, you know, like my dad always had cameras around the house. So I'd borrow his cameras and I'd take photos and then he would see me photographing at a show and they're like, have you ever silk screened? And I'd be like, no. And they're like, I can show you how to take a photo to print on a shirt. So it's always like these creative communities, there's always opportunities to learn new things. And I think that punk, to me, what I've always loved about it is like, you know, no permission needed. It's really explorative. It can be whatever you define it to be. So like, you know, I've shot photos for some of the biggest magazines in the world. I've never studied photography. That wouldn't have happened had I not got into punk. Like, punk didn't like provide me with a confidence, but it just always inspired me to try, you know, just like, I mean, like I would protest fur places. Like I knew I wasn't going to shut it down, but it's like, you know, sometimes like the end goal isn't changing the world. It's just trying to enrich yourself sometimes and just trying to try, you know? And I think like when you get comfortable with failing, you take things less seriously in a way where it's like you don't put everything on the line, where you just kind of realize like played in 4 bands before one took off. And I think like those are really great lessons for life, because I think this culture, it's like if you fail once in the mainstream culture, like you're over with, where, you know, punk allowed me to kind of like really stumble and just realize like it takes a bunch of different efforts for projects to get off the ground.
Right. What was the, I guess on that note, what was kind of the one thing that, you know, like the one thing that failed that you, I guess, derived a lot of knowledge from? Because I mean, you know, success is cool, and obviously everyone's striving for that, but like you tend to learn a lot less than when you fail. Like what sort of whether it's a specific project or whether it's a specific you know, discipline that you tried that was like, oh yeah, that sucked. And
I think objectively being a failed musician,
okay,
you know what I mean? Like never having a band where it like made it work. Like, you know, really wanted to put out a final like Abandoned Hearts Club record, and that dissolved. So that was unfortunate. And going to university and just finding myself where I just like hated that experience, and, you know, didn't fully do it to appease my parents. But, you know, I had one parent that's like quite creative and another parent that's quite entrepreneurial. So when I got to school, I was like, it just didn't feel like applied enough. So by the time I kind of graduated, I was just like, I just refused to move forward doing shit I don't want to do. Right. And I've kind of like stuck to that. Like I'm really, I don't know if proud is the proper word, but, you know, since graduation, like I've never really worked for anyone else. And I love that. Like I just like, you know, you only have so much time on this, in this world. And if you're not doing what you want to be doing, it just seems like wasted time. And that's obviously coming from a place of like privilege. I'm a white dude that was able to go to university. So in light of having that privilege, I'm you know, I'm going to floor it and just get as much out of life as I can while trying to help out people along the way.
It's a guiding principle that a lot of people, like you said, that may not have the means for executing that, but can hopefully put themselves in a position to potentially achieve that. But I think something that is kind of inherent, that seems to be built into our culture, is kind of like the hustle. A lot of people obviously refer to, you know, DIY culture, and it's like, you know, I see a lot of people for whatever, like Silicon Valley, and it's like people that are like apply those same principles, but obviously like their end goal is to become, you know, filthy rich. Yeah. Whereas like obviously the DIY punk culture, like that notion was never, it was just like, what's gonna make rent for this month, or what's gonna like last me in order to like get to the next thing that you're talking about.
It's funny though, because I actually hate the word hustle. Like people use that, like sometimes people will be like, oh, you're such a hustler, and like, hustle by definition means to almost like floss someone, to like confuse them to another thing. And I've always had kind of like two different ideas. Like one, I believe in like hard work. I think like when you work hard, you're able to create things and put that out in the world, and that will lead to the next stage. Kind of working hard. And honestly, like money to me has always been for throwing off the backs of trains. Like I've never done anything for money. And I think in my 20s, like that was detrimental to me, because I would just go down these creative rabbit holes where, you know, I would just buy groceries from like the dollar store, eating ramen noodles, just so broke, because it would be, I'd either be like a king or a pauper. Like a big check will come in that would float me for 4 months. But I always knew, I'm like, if I just do really cool stuff that's culturally significant versus commercially significant, I just know down the road everything will work out, and it did.
Yeah. I guess when, you know, after that, you obviously started pursuing that path of, like you said, you know, whatever, doing Switzerland, doing design work, and obviously started to develop your portfolio from that perspective. What, I guess, what one or two things like came in where you felt, I guess, legitimized from the outside world, where it was like, oh, wow, like I can't believe, like whether it was the photography of the people that you shouldn't have photographed because of your quote unquote credentials or whatever. When did you feel, I guess, legitimate in order for people to take the work that you did seriously?
I think like a few things, like, you know, getting to work with some of the bands that I liked at the time, like doing like Every Time I Die, Gutter Phenomenon, doing the packaging for that, which is like handmade, was like really cool. And just to see that record blow up was quite exciting, because album packaging still to this date is like one of the few pieces of kind of like commercial creative work where there's like a credit on it versus, you know, a radio jingle. It's not like at the end, it's like as sung by, or, right. Or, you know, you see a billboard, it doesn't have a design credit. So, you know, working with Every Time I Die was really great. Keith and all those guys are, you know, awesome. So to work with them was amazing. And then a few years into like the design company, I had an idea with some friends to start like an art gallery as well, to kind of, as we started to do more like commercial work, I've always had like a desire to give back, like the same way I would throw small bands on punk bills. When I started this gallery called the Emporium, I wanted to be able to run it for profit, but also not be profit dependent. So I could ask an artist to do like an installation takeover where you couldn't buy anything. It was just an experience. And I started to get some like pretty serious press out of that, which to me was like incredibly validating as well, because the art world is like quite fickle and rigid. So to break into that by almost like doing a cannonball through like the glass ceiling and just like, you know, landing splattered on my back into the art world was amazing as well. And then, you know, from that, being able to you know, work with XL Recordings and, you know, do music, you know, help with music videos for like Mariachi El Bronx, and then working with like Jamie XX and Gil Scott Heron, and being published and, you know, shooting photos for, you know, Vice or Pitchfork or Rolling Stone, Chicago Tribune. Like it's all been great, but it's just like, it's just hard work. You know what I mean? Like at the sacrifice of hanging out or going out or taking vacations, it's just working hard.
Right. I don't know if I would say fell into management, but like obviously you take care of single mothers from the management perspective, and then
which I never wanted to do.
Right. I mean, that's because like if someone approached me and was like, "Hey, would you like to manage a band, Ray?" I'd be like, "Never." Like I will manage like adults and individuals, but I will not manage a band. And then obviously you subsequently you released their record in Canada, correct? Like
so I have like a record label called Hot Charity, which is like an imprint of XL Recordings. So there's like Young Turks is kind of like an imprint of XL, which has like, you know, Twigs and the XX and Subtract, and then Hot Charity is our label, which is Single Mothers, Willis Orville, and Rat King. And so Single Mothers, like I had kind of like lost my love of punk for a few years, just as punk got bigger and more commercial, I find that like it can cater to like the lowest common denominator. So like all its ideology, all its ideas were gone, and it was just like this aesthetic that didn't connect to me. Like I loved punk when people like were singers were preaching from the stage, and people were saying fuck you, or you know, some bands wanted people to dance and some people were sitting down. Like I just love that conflict, and that like I just think wherever there's like conflict, there's interest in culture. And so when punk in kind of my neck of the woods was devoid of that, and it was just like this sound, I was like, this just sucks. And so I found that I gravitated towards bands that you know, were confrontational in different ways, like, you know, getting into like, you know, be it like Swans, or, you know, just like music that was like aggressive in a different way. It was like quite interesting. Sorry, I lost
the train of thought. No, it's how you got involved with Single Mothers.
Oh, so Single Mothers. So yeah, through this outgrowth, you know, eventually got connected to XL, and you know, we were obviously in charge of like doing A&R and signing bands. And I was living in Montreal at the time, and I had these friends who I'd go drink beers with every now and then, and they were like classic shirtless dudes, and they would be like, dude, you gotta play you this, you've never heard it. And they put on Hot Snakes. I'm like, dude, I know this. And so like party number 12, where they'd already like played me every band that I already knew, they put on like Single Mothers, just like we're streaming it through the internet from like an FTP site, like it wasn't on MySpace. And I like almost didn't give a shit about it, but then I was listening, I was like, fuck, this is pretty good. And I was like, who is this? And the guy at the party was like, oh, it's my old band, they broke up. And I was like, fuck, this is like the one like cool thing. And I was like, well, what can you tell me about this band? He's like, oh, they're fuck ups, like they're just like fucking singers are drunk, like this is all this infighting. And so like a few months later, like this must have been like, I don't know if it was late 2010, I was at back with these guys for a New Year's Eve party, kind of didn't have any plans, and I just brought over beer. And I was in this guy named Chance's apartment, and he was like, go offer a beer to this dude over there. And I was like, it was like a fridge full of beer. I was like, if that guy wants a beer, he can help himself to a beer. It's a small party. He's like, no, go offer to him. And I was like, dude, what's the gag? And he's like, oh, he's straight edge. And I was like, well, good for him. Like, you know, I was straight edge, and I respect people who are straight edge. I'm like, that guy doesn't want to drink. Like, that's totally cool. And then he goes, oh yeah, he's also in Single Mothers. And it was like needle scratch. I was like, fuck. So I went over and talked to that guy, and I was like, dude, I'm like, I love your band. I think it's so great. I've been emailing you. And he was just like, really? And he's just like, yeah, we're just kind of like inactive. So it took me like so long to persuade them that I was associated with the label. Like they just didn't believe me. Like it was like super weird. Like I was like showing them records and like my email, being like, see, my email like matches the records I'm putting out. And they were just like so distrustful of someone would even like care. And so I started to put work into them because they were in like a non-functional state. Right. And so it took so much work. And then I just had a colleague that I run the label with. He was like, you should really think about like managing them. I mean, on paper, Single Mothers has been a complete financial disaster for me. Like, but it's not about money for me. Like to me, it's like, I've been like overjoyed taking them from like a non-functional band to a band that this summer has played like Primavera, Pitchfork Fest, like, you know, helping like young people realize their dreams, and going from like not even a bar band, like a band that couldn't even get bar shows, to now playing like the world stages, and doing that for like an aggressive band to me is like an achievement I'm incredibly proud of.
Yeah, no, totally. It is. Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly interesting just because it's like you said, it's like it's never something that you were desiring. Like, oh man, I can't wait to pick up a roster of man. Like, I mean, I presume at this point, like if other bands approached you, you more likely than not would not be interested.
Yeah, I say no. Like I say no, and it's like I would love to. I just have to like pick my battles. Single Mothers, like I'm heavily committed to, and I'm already splayed out across like a few other creative projects that, you know, like when these young guys are like in a van and it's 120 degrees and AC breaks, like I want to make sure that I'm supporting it versus you know, my head's cocked with a phone on it talking about another project. So it's why to this day, like, you know, I was in Chicago last week, like TMing and acting as like a de facto publicist for Single Mothers. And that's on my own dime, you know, just going down there to support it. Like I wasn't going to go. And then we get calls from like New York Times and Pitchfork and Stereo Gum to do photo shoots. And I'm like, fuck, I'll just hop a plane and
let's do this.
Let's do it, or else they'll fuck it up. Like I love them, but it's like, you know, I always tell bands, like, you've got one responsibility, be great. And like, I just try and do all the terrible, boring work outside of that.
You know? You don't need to worry about the behind the scenes stuff. Just follow your path, play your shows.
Yeah. That said, though, I do like my approach is like a little like old school as well, because like I do ask the bands to be like involved in their career, like for a few reasons. Like, A, I want them to have like financial transparency and control their money, so you never end up in this Motown situation. And two, so people like value things. Like when you have young bands that are used to like getting flight out to Coachella, and then you have to ask them to like rent a van and go on tour, like that's a tough pill for them to swallow. Where it's like, you know, it's like the Drake song. Like if you start from the bottom and you end up at the top, like you always remember what the bottom is. And I think like that's what has made single mothers like quite grateful and hardworking, is that, you know, they have worked from the bottom up like incredibly hard. And I've simply like acted as like a shepherd for them. Like they're a fantastic band. Like I think Drew is like an incredible writer, the singer of Single Mothers. And it's like, they would have got there eventually. I just happened to kind of land on the scene and help them.
Right.
You know,
right.
like great bands are magnets that people will eventually connect with and help out. And so, you know, there's times where they're like, thanks so much. And I was like, dude, if it wasn't me, it would have been someone else. You know,
Right. We just
there
happened
at
to
the right
sync
time.
up. Totally. The notion, you know, kind of what you were alluding to in regards to kind of falling out of love with, you know, punk and hardcore and the stuff that you obviously grew up on. Because it is a common occurrence for people, like you said, where it's just like, you know, whatever, you go to university and all of a sudden like all these things you cared about have to be thrown away because of just sheer time constraints or your attention span. It's probably difficult to distill this down, but the idea of like, you know, keeping artistically engaged and excited, is it one of those things where you just find like it's a constant pursuit and it takes work to do? Or is it one of those things that it just happens because of, I guess, the environment that you're in?
First, with regards to music, like I was always conscious of like that old guy in the scene who would tell me how like agnostic front was like the golden age. And then so like, I have a deep, profound sense of respect for like what's come before me. And as I get older, I love it even more. Like, you know, I kind of work backwards, and I just reached this age where the contemporary music was like kind of bad. And, you know, like it lost its politics. And I was like, I don't want to be that guy just like saying that like Inside Out was like the best band ever. Like I want to be like, I live in the present, you know, like I have a respect for history, but I live in the present. And so that just kind of led me to different pursuits. And I think outside of that, I think like for a few years, like I replaced like a really profound passion for hardcore with like visual art and dove into that. And so, you know, we all create to get a reaction. And I just started, you know, writing and doing photo essays and installations, and would get that kind of same reaction and those same dialogues. And I think that's like why you create, because you're hungry for a response. And, you know, I stopped playing music in Switzerland. The design company was always a commercial enterprise. Like it was my livelihood. And then bands had always kind of represented like a pure place of just pure creativity. Like I knew I would never make money with bands. And so I kind of replaced that with visual art and, you know, specifically photography, and got that. But then that leads you back into music, right? Like then like bands like, can you shoot photos? And then, you know, you shoot for a music thing. So I kind of just like, you know, got on the kind of collector's lane of the music highway, and, you know, now I'm back in the express lane.
Right. It is. Yeah, it is interesting where it's like when you do dedicate your life to something like that, how as long as it's like not too far out of reach, you always get kind of pulled back in some capacity.
Like I always loved punk, and it like, I mean, that's one thing like I always really credit Single Mothers with, is like really inspired me to get like back into punk. And I felt like whatever wave of punk we're on now, like I'm really inspired by Trash Talk. Like I'm really inspired by Code Orange. I'm really inspired by Title Fight. Like I think these are all like, for a few years, like these kind of bands that created scenes, kind of like there was this flash in the pan where bands started getting on the radio, like hardcore bands, where I think like everyone was like, fuck, we can make a run out of it. Let's make a run out of it.
Totally.
And there was a bottleneck. Only a few did. And then it's kind of like the dust settled, and like these scenes and these kind of players have kind of emerged again. And so like, that's what inspires me now, you know, like I don't want to be the guy listening to old punk records. Like there's a time for that. Like I want to be consuming like new shit and supporting new shit and mail ordering shirts. And so the fact that there's all these like wicked new bands is like, it's fucking amazing.
Totally. It's weird because like, obviously when you, as you grow older and you're still engaged in this, it's weird for you to be able to notice a cycle, like where it's just like, oh yeah, like now you're able to see bands obviously aping what was happening in the early to mid 90s. And like for you and I, we're just like, oh, like, yeah, I've heard that before. And like, it's and not in like oh, you're regurgitating it. Yeah. But like, it's just bizarre to be able to be like, oh yeah, like, of course that's where they'd look for influence because.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like a little different about that, because I was like, I love No Warning. And even when like I was like experiencing No Warning, like a few years ago, like I was like really conscious that this was, like an homage to what had become before it. So Like, I do think it's interesting now because I think like these young bands who are like, you know, young millennials in their 20s are like rediscovering grunge. And so you have like these grungy kind of things. And I don't know. I never think like ill of that, you know. I kind of like, I get it because like when I was that age, like Ben Cook from No Warning was kind of doing a throwback band and that was still great, you know. And I think like when you're a creative person, you just realize like all creativity is pastiche. You're taking influence, you're always taking influences, like nothing's net new,
right?
You know? And I think like Title Fight has like grungy stuff that's kind of shoegaze, and you're like they're reinventing it in a cool way. You know?
Totally, because I always try to remind myself too, where it's just like they're presenting that version of something that is older for your 14 to 15-year-old kid.
Yeah.
Because like that culture is always going to stay the same age, and so if there isn't a band either replicating or duplicating or being influenced by that particular sound, that 14 or 15-year-old kid is never going to hear that until they're much
like No Warning was my agnostic front, right?
Sure,
and then like through that you work backwards. So
totally, like you said, it is exciting and engaging because it's like, yeah, the moment that you give up and say that, you know, like, oh, this is, you know, 2011 is where it all is.
Like I always loved punk. I just felt like left like heartbroken by punk because I understand that people wanted to milk it for what it's worth. It just got bad because it was like, I think like I'm not a gatekeeper of the scene, but like, you know, like people just like the aesthetic of it. So like these kids that like weren't from the scene just join the scene and have different ideas, and that's fine. And, you know, that can be exciting. I just thought that, you know, it just lost what was interesting about it. And you saw that with the death of like Hiderhead Records. Like you saw it with these like other labels blowing up and putting out like shitty stuff that, and then I just realized I was like, I don't want to be that guy that hates on the scene. Like the scene's just not right for me right now.
Right.
You know, and it's like, I recognize that. Like if this is, you know, sometimes you have to write yourself like out of the situation because you just realize like you're that sour grape guy.
Right.
But I'm like stoked to, you know, kind of see the scene kind of like reemerge or reinvent itself in a way that like feels like familiar to me and like really inspiring, which is making something out of nothing.
Yeah.
You know, like when I hear the Title Fight guys talk, I'm like, fuck, man, I feel like I grew up with you. Like I totally like, I love that spirit's alive. Like that's like, I'm so passionate about that. And I think it's like so inspiring, you know?
No, totally. The last thing I want to hit on before we ended was the, just because you've been able to delve into so many different worlds that don't necessarily either have adopted the aesthetic or have been engrossed within, you know, the punk and independent music culture. When you encounter people that either don't understand that context, is it weird to have to bring like, if you're trying to accomplish a piece of art or work with them, is it one of those things where you have to, you feel the compulsion to be like, well, here's exactly kind of where I'm coming from? Or is it like, is there some education process? Because I'm sure, especially in the artistic world where it's just like the idea of like, oh, can you make that look punk or whatever? Like, you know, that those words come out of people's mouths and it's just like, what does that even mean? Like, where are you coming from?
Yeah, I think I mean like lucky because like over the last decade, like I've had enough like creative victories where, you know, I feel like creatively you're either treated like a deck builder where someone's like, here's the plans, go build it. Or you're treated as like an artist where people are like, I know what you do, therefore I want to work with you. And like, I feel like really lucky that I'm in that other camp where people kind of know like the music videos that I've worked on or the kind of like, you know, big marketing ideas that I come up with. So I feel like that's what attracts them to me. And I think like what they like inadvertently get to experience is like, I am like a punk rocker. And I think like I bring a lot of value to people because I, you know, if I'm on a commercial, like I'm like, I can direct it. Like, don't worry, we got someone who can edit it. And it's like, you just don't need all this like formality. Like every great piece of artwork, like wasn't made through a formal process, right? Like whether it's like Robert Mapplethorpe taking photographs of Patti Smith, like he just shot them in his apartment and now they're like really amazing pieces of like culturally defining art. And it's like, you just don't need that permission. And so I think if I told you like, hey, I don't really know what I'm doing, but it's going to look great, I wouldn't get that job. But the fact that like the shit I make does well, you know, I kind of tell them that on the flip side.
Right.
By the way, I didn't even know what I was doing. So look what we made.
Right. Yeah. By the way, this was it came out rad, right? That's all.
Yeah.
The results are there.
Oh yeah. Like, I mean, there's so many projects where I'm just like in my head, just being like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Like, early music videos where I'd be like, how does everyone know how to show up tomorrow? And they're like, you got to send a day sheet to tell everyone where to be. You should have the weather on it and where to be. I was like, oh shit, okay.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah. How about everybody be here at 10 a.m.?
Yeah, I'm just like, when in doubt, Google it.
Right.
The film release you'll find there, what kind of insurance you need.
Totally. Or there's a YouTube tutorial on it.
100%. That's why I love that. That's why I donate to Wikipedia. That's why I donate to YouTubers, because I'm just like, you guys make me possible.
Totally.
Without your instructional 10-minute videos to show me how to open my hard drive on my laptop,
Right.
I'd be nowhere.
You're like, that is what the internet exists for. Well, I really appreciate you hanging out, and this was very fun for me to get to know you even better than I already do. So
amazing. Thanks for having me.
Of course, dude.
There you go. There was Ben. I was just so happy to have that discussion and document it because, like I said, I mean, he's worked in every medium, photography, music, business into things. It's so exciting when people can be so versatile and still be able to achieve whatever they're artistically trying to do. I love that fact. And I love that Ben was able to exemplify that and showcase that in this discussion. So, like I said, if you are an audio person, please email me, 100wordspodcast@gmail.com. Tom Richfield is the producer and makes this thing sound ever so sweet. So thank you to him as always. And visit the show's website, 100wordspodcast.com. And please, until next week, thank you. And be safe, everybody.
Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
It's football season, and you can now get almost anything you need for game day delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Can Uber Eats deliver foam fingers? No. But chicken fingers? Yes. Touchdown dances? No. Buttermilk ranches? Yes. Field goals? No. Grilling coals? Yes. There you have it. Get almost anything for game day delivered with Uber Eats, official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details. Get almost anything for game day delivered with Uber Eats.
This is Holly Fry from Stuff You Missed in History class. Toyota is a leader when it comes to electrified vehicles. Today, battery EVs make up less than 10% of new vehicles sold because of higher cost and concerns about range and charging. Enter Beyond Zero, Toyota's vision for a carbon-neutral future. With an electrified, diversified lineup of hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and battery EVs, Toyota empowers you to choose how to reduce your own carbon footprint. Learn more and get details at toyota.com/beyondzero. Toyota, let's go places.